Okay. Oh yeah, you can hear me. Well, it's nice to be here with you. It's always for me a pleasure to see you again. We're very blessed to be here, Maria and I, and so I say again thank you for your welcome, and thank you for letting me speak as well. I hope I've got something for us this morning. So far I didn't really know why I picked up the passage I'm going to be looking at this morning, but then I've heard some of the words or pictures people had before when they prayed, and I thought, oh, that's quite appropriate actually. And I just had this picture in my mind when we were there praying and meditating upon what we heard in the songs, and it's true, we went from death to life, and it's beautiful to see this as well in the nature, how life is this kind of strong force that always emerges from places that sometimes we think, how can life even emerge from these places? But it does, and that's so beautiful how God created things, as in how life is stronger than death. But for us who have passed through death and come through death to life in Jesus Christ, it is a struggle, and life needs to push through sometimes. And so I think this passage that I've taken in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, you will all know the story. It's when Jesus tells his disciple to go into the boat and to go ahead of him and to cross the lake, but Jesus only comes to them later on. So we are going to read the passage together, and then we will dig into it. But maybe just a couple of questions before I actually start. How does God reveal himself to his disciples? How does the disciples get to know who Jesus really is? Or how do they get to know who God really is through Jesus? How can a holy God, an almighty, all-powerful God, infinite in wisdom, in love, how can this perfect God reveal himself to finite creatures like us? And we're not only finite creatures, but we're also rebellious, we're sinful, we're slow to understand, and yet God has made something, has revealed himself so that we would know him. And this is difficult to understand or really to make sense of, and yet God has made sense of it for us. Even when we didn't understand. But I must say, when God reveals himself to us, we can really easily be tempted to replace God's revelation for something inferior, for some kind of images of God that only reflect some of what he's revealed, because we've only picked up what we wanted to receive from him. And so we transform this revelation into some form of inferior image, idolatrous image that serves us, that profits us, but that are nothing like what God wanted to tell us. And so hopefully this passage is going to help us to understand more how God reveals himself to his disciples and how he reveals himself to us. So let's read from verse 22 and chapter 14 in the Gospel of Matthew. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is a very a passage that is very rich, and before I actually look into the text, it's interesting to note how things move from land to sea, because just before that, Jesus feeds more than 5,000 people on in a desert place, but on dry land, and we read that immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. So it really happens kind of together in the passage. And it made me think of land as this safe ground on which we can stand, and we know we have a firm ground under our feet to stand on, and it is kind of a familiar place for the disciples. That's where they've been called by Jesus. That's where Jesus taught them on dry land, and it's where they can walk after Jesus and follow him and see all the wondrous thing he does and how he healed people. And all of this was the place they knew, and they knew they were with Jesus. They were safe there. But suddenly, we see sort of inversion going on here, because now, I mean, if I just go back a bit, like, before Jesus feeds the 5,000, it's Jesus who's on a boat and lands on land and the disciples come to find him. But here it's Jesus who's on land and he sends his disciple on the water. So now it's the turn of the disciple to go on the water. And in the passage before where Jesus feeds the 5,000, it's interesting to see how the disciples are quite confident, and they come to Jesus and say, "Hey Jesus, there's all these people there, they're very hungry, maybe we should do something for them." So the disciples are quite comfortable there, and they also work with Jesus, do things with him, and also kind of have some of the control on the events at that point. They give the impression that they know what they're doing, and they are quite comfortable in the place they are. Obviously, they must have been surprised to see the bread being multiplied and the fish. But they had already seen the power of Jesus at work for others, and they have seen many things, and they were convinced that Jesus had really a great power, that he had been gifted with something coming from God. He had that superior wisdom and teaching. So he was really not a rabbi like the others. They were aware of this, obviously. But did they really know or realize, had they already realized at that point who Jesus really was, as Jesus himself, for himself, not for what he does, not for what he can accomplish for others? Are they only following Jesus for what he is able to do, for his power? Or are they following him for who he actually is? Maybe at that point it was easy for the disciple to just get on into the habit of doing things with Jesus and seeing, people come to Jesus. Jesus is quite a cool person to be with, and people seem to like him, he does great things for them, so let's stick with him. But yeah, so we can ask, were they really with Jesus for who he actually was, or for what he was doing around and the power he was able to show around him? So yeah, there's kind of a shift here when Jesus sends his disciple in a boat, because here, so far they were in control of what was happening to them. They understood what was going on. But here, Jesus sends them immediately on a boat after they've done all this. And it is hard to understand why Jesus does that. I mean, they had done enough maybe today. Why did they need to, after all this, go on a boat and start crossing the lake without Jesus? Why didn't Jesus come with them at the same time? Here I must say it's very difficult to explain why Jesus orders them to go on a boat. It's not like, oh, if you go, you cross before me. The word is quite strong. It's like he kind of ordered them, he commanded them to, he gave a command to go on that boat and start crossing without him. So yeah, there's a situation here which is difficult to grasp, but maybe that through this sort of kind of irrational decision that we can't understand, why does Jesus do that? Maybe that Jesus is preparing a way in which he's going to reveal himself in a new way. Maybe he's breaking barriers so that the disciples would come to truly know Jesus as he really is. And so the sea is going to become a place of revelation for the disciples. He sends them in a place where there's no circumstances that the disciple will be able to have a grasp on. They will be on their own there. And Jesus is not compelled here by any circumstance to say, oh, I must send them on a lake. It is quite hard to understand why he does this right now. But Jesus is entirely free to do what he wants, and he knows what's best for him to reveal who he is to his disciple, even though the disciples may not yet understand why this is happening to them. Why do they have to go on a lake? And it's late, it's dark. And it's interesting to see how there's an emphasis or a contrast between the land and the sea, because we read that the boat was already a considerable distance from land. So there's really this idea of now we're in the middle of the sea, so we're far from land, and the land was where they were before, but now they're in the middle of the sea, and there's a real emphasis on that aspect, that here is a place that is completely different than the other, and in this place Jesus is about to reveal himself. And also we read that the disciples were struggling against the waves, and here this makes me think that they weren't in control of what was happening. I mean, they were shaken by the waves, they didn't have control on their boats, and they really had nothing to grasp, nothing firm to hold on to in this place, in this rocky sea. They are powerless and in control of nothing in this place that Jesus told them to go ahead of him. So we can understand their struggle and their fear, their anguish. Where has Jesus sent us? We're going to die here. We don't even control our boats. We can't control anything. We've lost a grasp of everything, and we don't have a grip on anything to hold us, to keep us alive. And yet, where is Jesus? We ask this question, where is Jesus? We saw him doing great things, healing people, rebuking the Pharisees, teaching wisely. But at this point, Jesus was in appearance not here. He appeared to be not here. They couldn't see him. It was dark. And the only thing that kept them alive at that point was maybe God's grace keeping the boat from capsizing until Jesus would appear to them. So, Jesus appears to them walking on the lake. We tend to, we hear this so much at Sunday school, that, Jesus walking on water, that's cool, that's nice. And we get so used to this idea that Jesus has done it, and it's actually, we just say it so easily, like Jesus walked on the water. Oh, yes, of course he did. But actually, let us just think about that. Because at first they don't recognize him, the disciples. They are terrified. And the text literally says, the disciples thought it was an apparition, an apparition or something like that, something that appears. And it can be said to be that they thought it was a ghost, but not something material, something that is like a spirit or something, but they didn't recognize Jesus. Because it is completely irrational that you'd think someone is walking on the water, someone with body weight and who can sink if they don't swim. And here it's not even swimming, it's walking on the water. So it's completely, it's never seen before, and the disciple never saw that before. So it's not like they were dumb and they just didn't think that Jesus could do that. No, it's because it's completely irrational. It is a combination of Jesus does something that you can only do on dry ground, that human beings, normal human beings, can only do on dry ground. He does it on the sea. There is a place where usually people are not in control of anything. If there's a storm, I don't know if any of you have already been in a storm. I've never been in a storm. But really, we don't master anything. And yet here Jesus appears on the water, walking on the water. It's completely crazy. And it is no rational explanation for Jesus walking on the water here. You can't rationally make sense of that. But here God reveals that he is above everything, that he is the one who knows what he does, even though we are lost and confused. He's the one who's got a control or a grasp on events that are completely ungraspable, like waves. He's not rocked by waves. He's the one who stands firm, even on the ground, on a sea that moves below him. It's literally, mathematically, physically impossible. This revelation is completely irrational, and it cannot be understood. If you try to make the math of it, you couldn't make sense of a human being of walking on water. Some people have tried, but there was a trick to it. And yet, here, Jesus says to them, as they were crying out in fear. Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And here we can just maybe put the slide, which it's very simple. I mean, in Hebrew it's one word, in Greek it's two. But he says one thing that really stands out here in this place. It is the I am, which is translated it is I in this version. But what we read is ego eimi, which is it is what God said to Moses to, it is the name that God revealed to Moses, and to say, I am has sent me to you, to the people of Israel. And here we've got the same saying, take courage, I am, don't be afraid. Jesus is there, the I am of God is standing firmly on the moving waters around the disciples. And I just wanted to call this a true event of revelation, because I think is one of the most true event of revelation, because it's so difficult to grasp and irrational that there is no way we can say, oh yeah, but it didn't really happen, or maybe it's this that happened. Because here, there is no way you can try to understand that event. You are so sure of this event because you can't make sense of it, but it appears before you, and Jesus is there. And whether you can understand it or not, you see Jesus standing there in a place where no one should be standing, but he does. And so he stands there firm in the middle of distress and anguish and fear, but he's here, and his voice says, take courage, I am, don't be afraid. I just had a little example of every day, just for us to understand what I mean by a truer event than every other event. But the sun rises every day, obviously. Otherwise we wouldn't see each other, and that's a good thing. But in our lives, we are so tempted to replace genuine events or moments of revelation with abstractions, or with things that we can compute or rationalize, and we make it a habit for us to maybe more easily go through our daily life, which can be a struggle. And habits can serve us positively, because life is tough, and if we didn't have some patterns and habits, then it'd be even harder. We have to rationalize some things, for sure. But take the sun, for example. If we rationalize it, that's what we do, that's what science do. Obviously we can explain why it rises, and we can say, oh, that's normal, it's because the earth just turned one round and is now in the same position it was yesterday, so it's day again, and it just works like that. It's normal, it's just completely, it's fine, it's completely normal. But isn't it that every day is a miracle? That every day is something that is completely hard to understand. Why are we here? And how is it that everything is so well done that actually we can live? The sun gives us life in a way, because we need the light of the sun to live. And if we think of it again and just reconsider how amazing it is that we can live because of the sun rising every day, we actually see the sun in a different way. And really a miracle, something that comes from God and a grace to us. Yeah. So this is what I wanted to highlight by something that is truer than anything. It is that here this event of Jesus appearing on the water is really true, and there is no way we can replace that by some form of inferior image, because if Jesus truly stands in this place of anguish and distress, you can't reduce that to some form of inferior image. So, yeah, the Son of God appears to the disciples in this place and reveals something of himself that they would never have understood if they hadn't gone on the water before. God is the one who rules over the land and over the sea. And just to close, had a couple of questions again for us. And I think this passage gets us to rethink what we are really asking for when we ask Jesus to reveal himself to us. Are we really ready for him to reveal himself to us? Are we aware that if Jesus was to truly reveal who he really was, this might also involve that Jesus commands us to go to a place that is not familiar to us, that is not comfortable, a place where he sends us out ahead of him. And I think we don't emphasize this often. We talk a lot of following Jesus, following into the step of Jesus, becoming more like Jesus. And these are really good. But here's something that strikes me, is that Jesus sends his disciples ahead of him. And yeah, it is hard to understand. But this is where we need faith to step into the boat. And I have not talked about Peter here, and I don't have time, sadly, to talk about him. But then Peter, who does the opposite and goes out of the boat by faith as well. But first, there is this sending out. We are sent out ahead of him, and we might not know or understand what's awaiting ahead of him. It might be waves, it might be really difficult, anguish, fear might lay ahead. But isn't it that God is preparing a way in which he's going to reveal himself as he truly is, and that there will be no abstraction around that would decrease the power of his revelation to us. So yeah, would we go there if Jesus met us on the way? Would we trust that he would join us in the middle of the sea? Would we have faith? To be honest, these questions make me feel so weak or little. And I'm not a tall person, but sorry about it. But even more short. I'm freaked out just by thinking that this could happen to me. That Jesus has not just called me to follow him, but he has also called me to send me out on the sea. That's really frightening. Just imagining myself to be on this boat in the dark. I really don't want to sink or to drown. That's quite awful. Yeah, and I'm just thinking about this. I'm not even on a boat, but that's frightening just thinking about it. So, yeah, we can have confidence that the Lord knows what he's doing. We might not understand. There's a lot of things we can't rationalize when God reveals himself to us. We are so limited in our understanding. But God, and here Jesus, calls us to faith. Don't be afraid. I'd like to close in prayer and then just read a psalm as well. Please, Lord, send me, because I want to know you for who you truly are. I don't want to be content with some inferior images that I have made of you. I do not want to delude myself with some abstractions of you, some abstractions that make you acceptable to me. I don't want to pick and choose. Lord, I'm aware that you will reveal yourself in ways that I can't understand yet, but that when I see it, I will get to know you. When I'll see your revelation, I will get to know you, Lord, because you gave us your Spirit and you give us faith. Your apparition to the disciples shows us how it shows us that it is you who choose the way you reveal yourself to us. You are the one standing firm on the sea. You do not need us to take hold of you because you stand firm. It is us who are in need of being held by you. We are too weak in faith and in strength to grasp you. We are too distant, but Lord, you came to us in the middle of the sea. And like you did with Peter afterwards, you took hold of him as he was sinking. You grasped him as he was sinking. He did not grasp you, but you grasped him, Lord. And thank you because you are so good to us and you come to us in our distress, in our anguish, in our fear. I know that my understanding is limited and you only, God, you know how to reveal yourself to me in a way that I would truly know you. I don't want to simply be told stories or told things, but we want to hear and receive from you the revelation you have for us. So come and take hold of us. Even this would mean that we had to go ahead of you in a place of unknown, of uncertainty, in a place where waves, rocks back and forth, or like where, everything seems to be against us. Because Lord, in this place we will truly see how you care and sustain us. So give us strength to obey you and step into the boat. Give us faith. Amen. I just read this Psalm 93 to finish. God reigns on earth as well as in heaven and on the sea. Just need to find it. And let us just a moment to think about this afterwards. The Lord reigns. He is robed in majesty. The Lord is robed in majesty, and is armed with strength. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. Your throne was established long ago. You are from all eternity. The seas have lifted up, O Lord. The seas have lifted up their voice. The seas have lifted up their pounding waves. Mightier than the thunder of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty. Your statutes stand firm. Holiness adorns your house for endless days, O Lord.